what does it actually mean to have faith be the most important thing in someone's life? And if you're struggling with that at the moment, faith is a big part of my life, but at the moment, I'm asking questions because it's testing my faith a little bit with some situations, some personal situations. You know what I mean?
And we're talking family here.
Yeah, we're talking family.
We
Sorry,
won't dive into detail, but we're talking family. And when you emailed, you put a couple of Bible verses on the table. You put Matthew 10 on the table, where Jesus talks about needing to put him before like father and mother and brother and sister and child. Let's just go through the context very quickly for that to show that it's not actually speaking into what I'm aware is going on in your world. So in the context there, Jesus is sending out his 12 disciples into Israel. He says, don't go to the Gentiles, don't go to the Samaritans, just go to the children of Israel. And he's warning them that they're going to be hated in some places. There's going to be division. In verse, I think it's like 21 of there, he says, brother will deliver up brother to death, and the father his child, and children will rise against parents and have them put to death. And you'll be hated by all for my name's sake, but he who endures to the end will be saved. So there's the sense that he knows that as he sends his disciples out into their community, that as they raise the message of the gospel and the good news, that it's not going to go so well for them. And in some situations, it's going to be family that turns against them and the message that they hold, their Jewish brothers and sisters. And then Luke raises it as well in a slightly different context. The key to that passage, though, is in verse 39. He who finds his life will lose it, and he who loses his life for my sake will find it. And I've seen this discussed in the sense that if you hold on too tightly to those around you, then you're not actually able to love them to the best of your ability, like to the best that they could be loved. That if we put God first, then we're not relying on these people for our sense of well-being. Now, that's slightly different from the context here, but if we hold them too tightly, we can't actually love them well because we need them to be something in order to fulfill us. When we hold on to God first, then we're able to love them because we don't need them in the same way. But I have just a quick question for you in the context that you find yourself in. When you think about putting faith first, does that mean that you're thinking about faith more than these other things? Does that mean that you're thinking about God more than these other things? Or is there something else to it? Like in your world, what does it look like to put God first?
That's a really good question. Well, he should be first and foremost in my thinking when it comes to any situation. And especially in a personal situation that I find myself in at the moment, the challenges that I find myself in at the moment, I find that I feel like he's not answering prayer, if I was to put it bluntly. And, time and time again, I've gone back to prayer. And so my faith has been challenged in that respect. And so I feel like it has been in front of mind, but because it's been challenged, I'm starting to, regress a little bit around that.
Yeah. I would say that in those times where we're finding things tough, that desire to pray or that thought that we should be praying or we want to pray is in itself an inclination of the Holy Spirit. It's the Holy Spirit that pushes us towards God. But when it comes to the situation that you're in, my guess is that the way that you're trying to resolve that or work it out is informed by your faith. Like it is not apart from your faith. You're a man who is shaped by faith. So when the sheer fact that you want to work something out rather than just throwing your hands up in the air and rejecting somebody, I think it is a demonstration that faith isn't necessarily the first and foremost thing in your mind, but it's the foundation here. It's the pillar that's informing how you go about what you're doing. So there are always going to be times in life where situations demand our attention, like they really need our attention. Like if I think about the commandment to honor your father and mother, for instance, by sheer nature of what relationships are like, in order to fulfill that commandment, there are going to be times where it really demands our attention. And we're not going to be thinking about the Bible. We're not necessarily going to be thinking about faith and prayer. But if we're formed by those things and we're formed by our faith, then it's going to be the foundation of how we approach that. So to give something our attention heavily in our mind and our practice is not to put God last. Sometimes the way that we go about it is the very act of putting God first, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
I think a lot of people probably have thought about this kind of thing before because it's a very easy statement for people to make. Be like, oh, my faith is everything to me.
Yeah.
God's my number one above all else, blah, blah, blah. But what does it actually look like, and what does it mean? And then, like you're saying, where people are like, maybe there's something that needs a lot of time and attention, but they're like, no, that's putting that above God. I need to be just praying instead, or I need to remove myself from that and try and keep him, like trying to understand what it actually looks like to live a life where that claim is true, where you say, my faith is number one. Maybe it looks different to what we had kind of pictured, or the pictures we've been told about what that looks like. This is coming, the quote that kind of started this was from a basketball player who's like, my faith is my most important thing in my life. But I'm like, from an outside perspective, you could look at him and you'd be like, I think basketball might also be one of the most important, with time and all that sort of stuff. But then that's not necessarily making the statement untrue.
And in his practice, I would imagine that when he's got downtime, when he's got space, when it's available to him, he's turning, and I read the article, he's turning towards services that are available to him. But when he's on the court, my guess is he's not thinking about God. God's informing how he would act towards other players, you would hope, and the ethics through which he pursues the game, because it's the foundation. But in that moment, he's completely focused on the game. But it's the underlying foundation that is informing how he goes about that, because of how he's been shaped and formed when he's away from that. So when you're away from those things that really demand your attention, that's where we want to be giving time to the practices that shape us, so that when we're in that time where we don't have the ability to focus there, that's being informed by our faith. So I would say in the family situation that you're dealing with, my guess is it looks like it's been informed by faith, because when you haven't been in that really demanding time, faith has shaped how you then act in that space. Those verses about, Luke uses really strong language. You've got to hate your father, hate your mother.
They're verses about putting God first, and it basically lists a bunch of people.
Yeah, and then Matthew says it a bit less harsh. I just want to point out that those have a specific context. So the situation that we were talking about with Selah, stuff that's going on in Selah's life, has a context as well, but it is different from that. So those verses don't translate over. The problem is we often isolate those sort of things from their context.
Who they were being spoken to, when and why.
Yeah, we isolate them from the context and we try to make them a rule. Now, there is a rule there that works, but it doesn't specifically apply.
But it's very hard to twist a verse to mean what you want it to mean if you have to add the context in, which is always a shame, when you're trying to find a verse to back up your thought that you already had,